Alright, so now we want to talk about the course of infection. Kind of what are the stages of an infection? So once a pathogen makes contact with a potential host, it basically is trying to establish an infection. And in some cases, the infectious agent might fail to establish that infection for a number of reasons. It just doesn't gain a foothold. And even when an infection occurs, sometimes the host may not develop a disease at all for a variety of other factors as well. So there's a lot of variation in what we're going to talk about here. So this is kind of a generalization of the progression that many infectious diseases follow. So we're going to look at 5 basic stages: the incubation period, the prodromal, the acute, convalescent stage, and then the continuation phase. So these give, once again, these are kind of generalizations, and so the characteristics of each stage kind of vary by the pathogen and can vary from one patient to another. And so let's talk about the first stage, the incubation period. So this is the time between infection and the development of disease symptoms. So that's considered to be the incubation period. The microorganisms are incubating, right? They've just been introduced into the host and they're getting acclimated and they're going to start dividing. So this incubation period could be hours for one microorganism, or it could be years for another. So once again, this is the time between the initial infection and the development of symptoms. So even the same pathogen can have a range of incubation times, and that has to do with host factors and the nature of the exposure. All that can kind of influence how quickly symptoms develop following an infection. So accurately determining the incubation time for observed infectious diseases can be challenging, since it's difficult to pinpoint the exact time at which the individual was exposed to the pathogen. So for something like influenza, it has a short incubation period of usually 1 to 4 days. So it's a lot of times much easier to track and monitor a population with influenza than it is for something like HIV, which has a very highly variable incubation period, which could be several months to many years. So much harder to kind of track and kind of figure out what was the origin of this infection. Right, so as it says, incubation period, it's the time when if you're first infected until the time that you start showing symptoms. At this point, it says the agent is multiplying, but you don't have any symptoms at all, right? So you don't feel anything. Now, from there, we move on to the prodromal stage. So it's during the prodromal phase that you start to feel the symptoms. So it says a 1 to 2 day period when the earliest symptoms appear. So it says a vague feeling of discomfort, head and muscle aches, fatigue, upset stomach, and general malaise. I love that term, malaise, right? You feel malaise, right? I'm sure we've all felt this at some point where you just have this notion that you don't feel good, right? You can't quite pinpoint what it is, but you know you just don't feel well. And that's kind of general malaise. So you don't really know kind of what you're getting, whether it's the cold that you're getting or whether it's a stomach bug, but you just know you feel kind of run down. So that's the prodromal phase, and it's very short. After the prodromal phase, the patient usually progresses to an acute phase where they experience full-blown kind of classical symptoms of the disease. All right, so at this point, the microorganisms are multiplying at a very high level, and they're showing their greatest virulence, so you're getting a lot of symptoms from that. And so now you can kind of tell what you've got. If you've got a cough, you've got a rash, and so you're much more able to identify the microorganism that might be at the root of the issue. Okay. Now, when you can transmit the microorganism from one individual to another, that's highly variable. So a lot of times we think of individuals with symptoms as when they start to show symptoms that they can then transmit the agent. So that's certainly true, right? But other organisms can be transmitted during different periods. So, for example, chickenpox is actually most easily spread 1 to 2 days before the rash appears. So before you get to the acute phase, you can still spread chickenpox to other individuals. So you can imagine how tough it is to kind of prevent the spread of a disease that is contagious before the symptoms develop. Measles and hepatitis, they spread most easily during the incubation and prodromal periods. So once again, you can still spread disease even though you may not be showing any types of symptoms at all. Now, during the period of convalescence, the pathogen replication kind of decreases and the patient then starts to feel better. So the patient may still be infectious though, even though they feel better. And sometimes people who are on antibiotics or they're taking antibiotics to treat a bacterial infection, they may prematurely stop taking their medication during this period of convalescence. And in such cases, the pathogen might return in full force, causing a relapse in the patient. And even worse, the pathogen could have developed antibiotic resistance as a result of the patient failing to follow the required treatment time, the required course of antibiotics. Right? So it could lead to antibiotic resistance if they stop taking it during this time. Okay, so the convalescent period, you start to feel better, and that's because your immune system's kicking in. The microorganisms are not reproducing at much as high a rate as before. All right, and you start to get better. So the convalescent period usually involves the elimination of the pathogen from the body, but sometimes the host can harbor a pathogen indefinitely. And this is especially true for certain viruses. So in such cases, the pathogen can exist in a dormant state within the host, and they may reactivate later. So they could remain asymptomatic for long periods of time, only to have symptoms reemerge from time to time later on. So this is what we call a continuation phase. And in some cases, even when somebody has a latent infection and they're asymptomatic, they can still infect others. So the human herpes simplex virus is an example of a virus that can induce a latent carrier stage. The Epstein-Barr virus that initially causes mononucleosis can lie latent in B cells and reactivate later on in life. Even long COVID is another example of an infection that is kind of gone, but individuals still report symptoms later on. All right, so that for that continuation phase, all right, it says the organisms linger for months or years or indefinitely, or, so the other or is that the organism is gone, but you still have symptoms from that infection. Okay, and that's what happens with the long COVID. So in that little graph at the bottom there, it's showing cholera. And we see that you're kind of critically ill from probably about day 3 to day 7 or 8. So that's your acute stage. And then in red, the red bar is showing when the individual is infectious but asymptomatic. So after being critically ill during that convalescent period, they're still very infectious. And so that's shown from a little bit before day 8 through day 17 and onward. And so this became a problem, an example of kind of what can happen during this phase here is, let's see, there was a case of the United Nations peacekeepers who were asymptomatic for cholera, and they went to Haiti to assist the people of Haiti after an earthquake to help them recover. And because they were asymptomatic for cholera, they ended up spreading cholera to the people of Haiti, and they caused a cholera epidemic of some 500,000 cases, and some 7,000 individuals ended up dying from cholera in Haiti. And this was back in about 2010 that this happened. So once again, kind of that asymptomatic phase can be a real issue, right? When you're not showing any kind of symptoms at all and you're still able to spread the disease afterwards.